Thanks. Yeah, started. Please go ahead.
Okay, so hello everyone. Today we have with us Dr. Pramod, and he's a postdoc researcher at MIT, and he is going to present his paper submitted at TPAMI. The paper is Improving Machine Vision Using Human Perceptual Representations. Sir has been working with Professor Nancy Kishore to understand the neural basis of human cognition, and we're really excited and we're looking forward to the talk, sir.
Very good, Dr. Pramod. Please go ahead. Please go ahead. I think full screen. Yeah, yes.
Sir, you're on mute.
Sir, Pramod, you're on mute. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes.
Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yes. Good.
Okay. Cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Chanmejaya and Shambhavi, for organizing this and giving me this opportunity to present my work. Today, I'll be talking about my recent publication on improving machine vision using human perceptual representations, which is now online at the IEEE Transactions on Pattern Analysis and Machine Intelligence Journal website. This work was done during my PhD with my advisor, Dr. S.P. Arun at Center for Neuroscience, Indian Institute of Science. So let's jump right in. Every day we hear stories about how machine learning and specifically deep learning has revolutionized computer vision. A specific class of these models called convolutional neural networks, or CNNs, have shown impressive performance on object recognition tasks. However, they're still inferior to human in many aspects. Humans are better at detecting car and people in natural scenes, with a 10 to 15% performance gap between humans and CNNs. Humans are also better at recognizing objects under various distortions, in this example, Gaussian blur and noise. CNNs are more sensitive to texture information present in the image, whereas human would still recognize the cat in the third panel of the figure, whereas CNN classifies it as Indian elephant. And of course, the most popular one, which is the adversarial example. You can add imperceptible noise to an image so that the CNN misclassifies it with great confidence. However, humans don't make this mistake. So how human-like are the representations learned by these convolutional neural network models of object recognition? Are there ways to make them match human behavior? So in the paper, we try to address these issues by asking three specific questions. First, how closely do machine vision models match human perception? So I would like to stress here that we're asking this question of many machine vision models, of which CNNs are a subset. And second, we asked if machine vision models do not completely match human perception. If they do not match human vision, are there systematic ways in which most or all of these models deviate from human perception? And finally, we asked if machine vision models can be improved by augmenting them with systematic biases that we find out in answering the second question. So now let us consider the first question. Since we are concerned with comparing machine vision and human perception in this case, let us first start by acknowledging that object recognition follows similar processing stages in both humans and machine vision models. We start with an input image, and then we move on to a feature extraction stage. In the human brain, feature extraction happens in the visual cortex, which is situated at the back of the brain. And in machine vision pipelines, we usually extract image features using various methods like Gabor wavelets, SIFT features, and more recently, unit activations from various layers of a deep neural network. Once we have these features corresponding to the input image, we move on to a decision-making stage. In the human brain, this happens in the prefrontal cortex. And in the machine vision pipelines, decision-making is done using a classifier. In both cases, the output of this decision-making stage is the label identifying the input image. So far, I've told you how we can draw some parallels between human and machine vision systems in terms of object recognition. But how do we go about comparing them? There are two ways to go about it. First, we can compare the performance at the classifier stage. But this doesn't take into account the contribution of both the processing stages. For example, higher object recognition performance could be due to either a complex feature extractor or a complex classifier. Further, classification accuracy is a discrete measure, which is insensitive to all the fine-grained differences between various object instances within a category. So how about comparing features then? This seems reasonable in the sense that we can compare the actual representations that underlie classification performance. Also, we can readily access image features from the machine vision pipeline. However, it is very difficult to extract feature representation from the brain. So what do we do here? So we realize that instead of comparing features, we can compare distances, since we have robust ways of measuring perceptual distances between objects in humans. So how is that done exactly? So in the next slide, I will show you a scene. Take a look at it for a couple of seconds and tell me if you were able to see a cat in the picture.
Just one doubt, Pramod. When you say output label, this is manually, right? Like you see the photo and you manually label the image. Is that
so? In case of humans, I mean, what I'm presenting in the top row, which is about the brain, this is essentially we look at a picture and say what objects are present in the picture.
Just verbally,
right?
just verbally.
Yeah. You can do a task or use that information that you glean from the image to do certain other tasks, for example.
Understood.
Yeah. So yeah, so in the next slide, I'll show you a picture and there's a cat hidden in the picture. Take a look at it for a couple of seconds and tell me if you can see the cat. You can use the reaction buttons on Zoom to indicate whether you found the cat. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so there was a question from the audience. Swaroop asks, how were the regions found in the human brain? Was it by studying any electric signals like EEG?
Yes, these regions have been found out in the brain by doing neurophysiological or electrophysiological recordings. This could be either by poking electrodes into different parts of the brain and recording signals from those regions while the animal was looking at different stimuli. And also, we've been able to sort of replicate this in the human brain by using non-invasive techniques like fMRI.
Okay. One more question. Like in case of when we are dealing with audio or speech signals, we use MFCC features because they replicate the human auditory system. Do we do something like this of replicating the neurological makeup of human mind and computer vision as well?
So I would say some of the popular techniques used in computer vision, like various image feature extraction methods, are actually inspired by the processing in the brain. For example, the Gabor wavelet pyramid that people use to extract different kinds of features from images roughly mimic the kinds of processing and the kinds of selectivity you see in the primary visual cortex. And more recently, when you talk about convolutional neural networks or deep neural networks, the architecture that they use and the convolution sort of filters that are built in the processing stages, those are inspired by the hierarchy of processing in the visual system of the brain.
Thanks.
Thank you. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So as I was telling you, so I'll show an image and there's a cat hidden in it. So use your reaction buttons, either like clap or a thumbs up, whenever you find the cat in the picture. So I'll give you a couple of seconds and let's see how many of you find it. Oops, sorry, this one. Yeah. No. Yeah.
Oh, this one. I've seen this somewhere on the internet. But I
do you remember it?
But I don't know where it is. Okay. I can see it now.
Okay, so use your reaction buttons to tell me.
I'm still not able to spot it.
Cool. Okay, so let me go ahead and reveal where it is. There it is.
Yeah.
Oh no. Okay.
See?
Good.
So here's the cat. The main point of the demo was to just show you how difficult it was to find the cat because the cat was camouflaged in its surroundings. So
Yes.
it is very similar to the background, right? So in other words, you took longer to find the cat, or it was sort of nearly impossible for you to find the cat because it is very similar to the background. So we use this in a laboratory setting uh, to find out or to measure distances between pairs of objects. So what we did was we showed an array of items like this to people and asked them to find the oddball. So in this particular case, the task is easy. So people take a few hundred milliseconds or a couple of seconds to locate the target. So this suggests that the target, the oddball target, is very distinct from the distractor and hence should lie far apart in the perceptual space, right? In contrast, this other task is relatively difficult. So it takes you longer to find out where the target is. And this indicates that the target and distractor items are very similar in our perceptual representation. So we use this visual search paradigm to measure perceptual distances in humans. So in order to make large-scale comparisons between human perception and machine vision models, we collected a large data set of about 2,800 objects and measured perceived dissimilarity for around 26,000 pairs of these objects across 269 human participants. The objects included simple and abstract silhouettes, like I'm showing you here, and also complex grayscale natural objects. So we had a gamut of objects that we considered here so that we can explore all the fine-grained differences between human perception and computer vision models.
So these are from any existing data set or?
Not really. Most of these like silhouette abstract images were created by me.
Oh, in Inkscape, like in a software like Inkscape or something like that?
Not really. I think I sort of drew them by hand and then used like an algorithm sort of to combine them in multiple ways.
Very good. Yeah.
And then these animals were from a data set that we've been using in the lab to do like many psychophysics experiments and stuff. So yeah.
Got it.
And then, so now we have this image set. We, again, as I told you before, we used visual search to measure all these pairwise distances in human perception. So I'll tell you how exactly we did that. So we showed visual search arrays like this to our participants and asked them to find the oddball target. So specifically, in each trial, we showed a blank screen with a fixation cross at the center for 500 milliseconds. And the idea was that the subject actually fixated at the center. And when we show this oddball search array, there is a red vertical line in the middle of the screen, dividing the screen into two halves. And the subject has to indicate by pressing a key whether the oddball target is actually on the left side or on the right-hand side of the screen, as quickly and as accurately as possible. So we did this multiple times so that we get a good estimate of what the reaction time is for each of these pairs of objects. And then used the reciprocal of the reaction time in visual search as a measure of perceptual dissimilarity or perceptual distance. So if this is not obvious, ask me about it and I can explain it further.
Yeah. This, like I read the paper that you chose few people and you asked them to identify, right? So the reaction time is you asked them to press a buzzer or something. How did you measure that?
So this is actually, by asking them to press a button. So we show the search array, and as soon as they find the oddball target, for example, we had the normal sort of QWERTY keyboard in the experimental setup, and they had to press the Z key to indicate the target is on the left side, and M key to indicate that it was on the right side of the screen.
Good. Very
So,
good.
and we do this for multiple such pairs of objects, and also for each pair we showed this multiple times so that we get a good estimate of the reaction time. And
So,
as I showed you in the demo, the reaction time is a measure of how similar the target is to the distractor.
yeah.
Right?
Understood.
So if you take the reciprocal, that gives you a measure of how dissimilar the target is to the distractor. So this is a measure of perceptual dissimilarity or perceptual distance.
So the people chosen, does their age or does that matter, or anybody is fine?
As long as you have normal or corrected to normal vision and don't have any underlying sort of cognitive
Okay.
disabilities, I think it should work well.
Fine, okay.
Because we had a range of age groups in this study.
Very good.
And also, I mean, there have been other studies looking at differences between young adults and older adults.
Okay.
And we see highly correlated sort of reaction times across age groups. So it shouldn't matter. So if at all you find that there is a constant shift in the dissimilarity measurements, but there is still correlation across age groups.
Yeah, thank you. Saurabh, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
No, sir. Yeah. It's proper. I got confused myself. It's okay. It's correct.
Thank you. Yeah. Please go ahead, Pramod. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, just to sort of reorient you to whatever I explained just now, we measure the reaction time and take the reciprocal as the perceptual dissimilarity estimate. So you might ask, okay, this is all fine, but how good is the data that you've collected? So is it robust? So to test that, we actually divided our subject pool into two halves. We took the even number subject into one group and odd number subjects into another group, and estimated the perceptual dissimilarity measurement for all of these 26,000 image pairs within these two subgroups, and then correlated those dissimilarity measurements. And that is what I'm showing you here. On the x-axis is the average search dissimilarity measured on even numbered subjects, and on the y-axis is the average search dissimilarity measured on the odd numbered subjects. And we see they are highly correlated. So the correlation is around 0.81. So we have a consistent measurement of dissimilarity measures across subject groups here. And we also saw that this measure of our perceptual dissimilarity actually captures various facets of object perception in humans. So what do I mean by that? So if you take a subset of these images that I've chosen, for example, I chose a bunch of animals and a bunch of inanimate objects here, and we have measured all the distances. So we used what is known as multi-dimensional scaling, or MDS, to project these representations into a two-dimensional visualization, just to see how each object is related to every other object in the perceptual representation. This is just for visualization. And what we can see here already is that all the animals cluster together on one side and all the inanimate objects are on the other side. So there's this distinction between animals and inanimate objects, which is also sort of a hallmark of human object perception.
So by this logic, people take longer to detect that screw or whatever, and they detect the animals in a shorter time. How do I?
So the way to interpret this is, for example, if you have, for example, a dog as the target and a cow as the distractor. So then you will take longer to find the dog. But if you have the same dog as the target, but let's say a teapot as a distractor, so it'll be easier for you to find the dog.
Got it.
Right? So that is what is being represented here.
Good. Thank you.
So, And also, as you can see, there are multiple views of the same object. For example, here you can see that the clock has 2 views, and the teapot has 2 views, the car has 2 views, and those 2 views are very close together in this representation. So what this also suggests that different views of the same object are very similar in perception. And this is sort of obvious to us, right? So we have consistent measure of perceptual dissimilarity here on this huge data set that we've collected. And just to recap what I've been telling you so far. So we're trying to answer how closely human perception matches machine vision representations. And to do so, we have collected a large stimulus set and measured perceptual distances for thousands of pairs of objects in humans. And now we have to compute distances for these object pairs in machine vision models, right? So how do we do that?
So there's one question. Ananya asked, do the relative sizes of the images represent something?
Do the relative sizes of the images represent something? Not in this visualization, actually. So we rescaled these images so that they can fit in this visualization. But in the experiment, we maintain the longer dimension of the objects same across images.
Okay. Ananya, does it answer your question? Yeah. Yeah, please continue.
What is R?
Where is that? Oh, so that's the Pearson correlation coefficient.
Okay.
So that just, I mean, it's a measure of how similar, for example, in the plot on the left, where I'm showing you the average search dissimilarity across 2 subject groups, this R measure just sort of is an indicator of how similar the reaction times or search dissimilarities are across these 2 groups. So if they're perfectly correlated, which means the correlation is 1, that means there is a perfect sort of match between the dissimilarity measurements across the 2 groups. So
good. Very good. Yeah, please continue.
So then, yeah, so as I was telling you, all that remains now is to sort of estimate these distances in various computer vision models in order for us to compare human perception with machine vision models. So how do we do that? So, it's very simple. So we take like any 2 objects in a pair, and we extract feature representations for those 2 images. So it could be either Gabor filter bank features, or it could be unit activations from different layers of a convolutional neural network. And then we compute the Euclidean distance between the 2 feature vectors. And that is our measure of distance between these 2 images in computer vision models.
Any specific reason to choose a Euclidean?
Not really. We actually tried different measures. We also tried the L1 norm. And I think I also tried using a correlation distance.
And things like dynamic time warping doesn't work in this case?
I haven't tried that actually. But do you have any reason that it might change things?
Yeah, because Euclidean distance is again just comparing the 2 distances, right?
That's right.
I have
2 feature
done something
Yes,
I've done something similar for audio, and we chose dynamic time warping because it was taking the best distance possible. So accuracy was significantly improved when compared to Euclidean distance.
That's
because
right.
It was using that dynamic programming approach.
Yeah. You mean that also matters whether you're sort of reweighting all these features while you're computing distance, right? I think that's how it works. All features are not weighted uniformly, I suppose. Is that true? Yep. So I think to answer that question, what we did was, I think it's in the paper. I will not be presenting that, but what we did was to actually reweight all these features using a cross-validation approach to actually get the best mixing of these features to estimate the distances. And there also we find similar results. So that doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, I'll be sort of presenting my results on the Euclidean distance measures, but it sort of stays true even if we take the L1 distance, for example. So, and like this, we computed distances for all these thousands of pairs of objects on 23 machine vision models. And these also included VGG16, GoogleNet, and all the different versions of ResNet trained on ImageNet.
One more question, please.
Yeah.
Why choosing the best performing model and not taking an ensemble of the models?
I'll also talk about that in a couple of slides.
So let us let Dr. Pramod go through a couple of slides, then so that his train of thought is not broken.
Not really. I mean, feel free to interrupt me, but I'll be answering that question in a couple of slides. So hold on.
Yeah. Go ahead, please. Yeah.
So yeah, now to sort of just summarize whatever we've done so far, we have measured perceptual distances in humans as the reciprocal of reaction time in a visual search task. And these perceived distances were measured on about 26,000 pairs of objects from 269 human participants. And also we measured distances in computer vision as Euclidean distance between the feature vectors. And these feature distances were calculated on the same 26,000 pairs of objects across 23 computer vision models. So now we have the distances that we wanted on the data set, the image set that we have. And these distances can be directly compared now, right? I mean, it's simple. So you take the perceptual dissimilarity vector for all these 26,000 odd object pairs in humans, and you take the same distance sort of vector from any of the computer vision models and just compute a correlation coefficient between the two vectors. That will give you an estimate of how closely these model distances match human perceptual dissimilarity. But that doesn't cut it, because whatever the models are able to explain also depends on how good your estimates of perceptual dissimilarity is, right? So we need to correct this with the reliability of the data. So for that, what we do is we compute corrected split half correlation, which is essentially the plot I showed you before, the scatter plot, but you sort of correct it so that you have this reliability measure on the entire data set rather than half the data set, right? So we call that corrected split half correlation, RC. And then we have this percent variance explained measure, which is the squared ratio between the model correlation and the corrected split half correlation. So this is what I'll be using to say how good a particular computer vision model is in explaining human perceived dissimilarities. So this is what we have. So on the x-axis, I have all different computer vision models grouped into different classes of models. I mean, it doesn't matter for the talk, but just so that I can sort of orient you, all the bars in brown are network-based models. And there also I've included 5 of those convolutional neural networks that I just told you about, GoogleNet, ResNet, and VGG16. And what we can see already here is that these deep neural network models explain only 55% of the variance in the data. So they don't explain everything about human perceived dissimilarities in our data set, but only about 55% of it. So there's still a lot to be explained. And also, as we can see, none of these other computer vision models actually match human perception. The bar on the right-hand side in blue, which I've labeled split half, is actually the human reliability measurement, the split half correlation. And none of these models actually hit that mark. So none of the vision models explain all the variance in human perceptual dissimilarities. So as Shambhubi asked, instead of considering each of these models individually as separate sort of entities, why not combine all of them so that we give these models the best chance to explain human data, right? So that is exactly what we did. So we then wondered, if we combine all the powers of these 23 models and create a better model, probably we might explain perceptual dissimilarities better. And to do so, we took the weighted linear combination of all the model distances and predicted and reweighted them using optimization and cross-validation to fit perceptual dissimilarity measurements in humans. So we call this the COM2 model because this is the second combined model that we tried out. And if you're wondering where COM1 model is, it is in the paper. I won't be explaining it. So if you're interested, go ahead and take a look at it. So we then actually looked at how this combined model predicts human dissimilarity measurements. And as you might have already predicted, I mean, or if you've read the paper, it's obvious. We found that these perceived distances actually are better models of our, I mean, these predicted distances are actually better correlated with our perceived distances for this combined model. And it also explains a variance of about 68%, which is a 13% increase to any of these individual models. In 13 percentage points, yeah. So this is the best model that we found. So to answer the first question, how closely do machine vision representations match human perception? We can say that deep neural networks explain more than half the variance in human perceptual data. But if we combine all the models into one giant model or a supermodel, we can explain 68% of the variance in the data. So let's move on to the next question. So do machine vision models deviate systematically from human perception? Because we saw that there's this huge gap between perception and models, with even the best model explaining only 68% of the explainable variance, right? So is there some systematic deviation there? So to do this, let's take a closer look at the plot I showed you before. So on the x-axis is the predicted distance from the combined model. And on the y-axis, we have perceived dissimilarity measured on humans for all 26,000 and odd pairs of objects here, right? And I've highlighted a bunch of objects on the top left-hand side in the plot here. So these are all the image pairs for which the perceived distance is greater than the predicted distance. So these pairs of objects are more dissimilar in human perception compared to this combined model predictions, right? So what are these object pairs? So when we looked at a bunch of these object pairs, we found that most of them had symmetric objects, and most of them had differences in areas of these objects. And some of them, we could not put a label on it. And on the other side, if you look at the bottom right corner of the scatter plot here, so these are the images where the model thinks that they should be more dissimilar than in human perception, right? The predicted distance is more compared to the observed human dissimilarity measurements. So what are these object pairs? So we found that most object pairs in this group actually had shared features or were mirror images of each other. So there is something systematic going on here, but we need to sort of quantify this so that we can estimate this property and see how it changes across all computer vision models that we've chosen, right? So to do that, we need to turn this into a number. For example, if we take the case of these symmetric objects, we need to convert this to a number so that we can compare that number to the model estimates. So the idea is, if we compute the residual error, which is the mean square or the squared error, square difference between the model predictions and the observed human dissimilarities, will that show any correlation with how symmetric the objects are, right? For example, we might expect that the residual error is high if both objects are symmetric compared to when both objects are asymmetric. So we need to compute a measure of symmetry now for each object pair. So we did that by using a very simple sort of measure. You take an image and you flip the image across along the vertical axis and overlap the two images and compute the difference and take the average difference. And this average difference will be 0 if the two halves are perfect sort of reflections of each other, which means if the object is actually symmetric, like bilateral symmetric along the vertical axis, right? So 1 minus whatever number you get from this average difference will give you a score of vertical symmetry, right? And you do this for both objects in the image pair. And you do this also with respect to the horizontal axis, right? And the symmetry score that we ultimately used is actually the max of the vertical symmetry score and the horizontal symmetry score. And you then take the average symmetry score for the two objects within a pair. And then correlate that symmetry measure with residual error across all these models. And what we find that there is a positive and significant correlation between the residual error and the symmetry score across all these models, except for two models which don't show a significant correlation. So more or less, all computer vision models that we tested show this consistent deviation from symmetry. So symmetric objects are more distinctive in perception than in machine vision models.
Yeah,
is this clear?
Yeah, I think we'll take a couple of questions. CK, can you please unmute and go ahead? What did you mean? CK, please put your name. CK, can you please unmute? Okay.
Hi, I think I got my answer. I was just asking whether SH is along horizontal axis. I think he answered subsequently. Yeah.
I had a question, Pramod. Is uncategorized in the previous slide is not labeled, or what does uncategorized mean? Because
uncategorized, as in, I mean, we couldn't find an obvious sort of name to sort of bunch these object pairs together.
Okay. So feature, you're trying to do it feature wise.
That's right. Yeah.
Like symmetry. You're trying to do something related to geometric shape.
This is more or less about the shape. That's right. Yeah. Or the kinds of features that are present in these objects. That's right.
One more question. You said you took a weighted score from all the models. So when you're taking a weighted score, it is taking the best score generated by any model. Why not stacking them and taking in account all the model scores? Is it better to perform weighted ensemble in deep learning models, or it is just particular to this case?
So if I understand your question correctly, you're asking why we did this with all models, but not only deep neural network models. Is that the question?
No, I'm asking, you said you took a weighted output, as in the output from the best performing model.
No, not really. So this is, you reweight the model distances. For example, say model 3 will have a higher weight than model 2, but all of them will be considered in this, not just one of them. Yeah, that's right. So it's a weighted average of all the distances.
Okay. One last question from Ananya. Ananya, can you please unmute yourself and go ahead quickly? Ananya.
Yes, hello. I had a question earlier. What all were the features that were extracted from the models, from the images? Could you give examples?
Yeah, sure. So we actually used like the more commonly used computer vision feature extractions like SIFT, HOG, scene-gist features, and we also used Fourier power, Fourier discriminator. I think that's what it's called. Fourier descriptor. Fourier descriptor, and we also used a sum of squared error just to look at the pixel-wise differences, if that can actually explain our perceived dissimilarity measurements. And along with that, we also used a model of the primary visual cortex, which is essentially like a Gabor filter bank with some added sort of normalization step and nonlinearity at the end. And these deep neural networks. So yeah.
Good.
Does that answer?
Ananya, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Please go ahead, Dr. Pramod. Enough. Yeah, now we'll go.
Cool. So yeah, as I was telling you, symmetric objects are more distinctive in perception than in most of these machine vision models that we tested. So now we actually go ahead and look at the other kinds of differences that we found, like these overestimated pairs, right? Objects that have shared features or that are mirror versions of each other or like different viewpoints of each other. So what these objects should show higher predicted distance or higher model distance compared to the perceived distances. And we quantified that just by computing the mean residual error for all these object pairs. The ones that I'm showing you in the darker shade of blue is for those pairs of objects that don't share any parts. And the one in green are those object pairs that actually share two different parts amongst themselves. So what we see here is that as the number of parts shared increases, the mean residual error also increases. Further, we also looked at object pairs which have the same object but in different views, or if they're mirror images of each other, or if they have the same shape but have a different texture, or different shape and have the same texture. So in all these cases, we found that the mean residual error is actually negative, which means the observed distances measured in humans is actually smaller than what the model predicts. So objects with shared features or parts, they are more similar in perception than in most machine vision models. Is that clear?
Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
So if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. So
we'll take the. Okay, no questions. Please go ahead. We anyway have Q&A, so we'll come back to you.
Okay, cool. So to answer the second question, so do machine vision models deviate systematically from human perception? We found that the answer is yes. And specifically, symmetric objects are more distinctive in human perception than in most machine vision models. The reason I'm sort of stressing on symmetry as a property here is because that is pretty important for the third question. So can we improve machine vision models using human perception? So to answer this question, we specifically looked at symmetry property and tried to see if we somehow use this and augment a deep neural network with symmetry related information, will its performance actually improve? Will its object recognition performance actually improve? And the way we did that is by using a very simple procedure. So for every class of image in ImageNet, we actually created a negative class with randomly sampled images from all other image categories. So you have a positive class and a negative class of images. And you pick an image from either of these classes and pass them through a convolutional neural network, as I'm showing you in the bottom port here. So you get an output probability score, right? It'll be like a 1,000-dimensional vector with probability for each class, right? So you get that output probability score. Again, the same image, you pass them through our symmetry feature extraction module, which is essentially what I showed you before with SV and SH. But instead of only two axes, we computed symmetry along multiple axes because we didn't have control over all the object viewpoints that were there in ImageNet, right? So we actually took 8 different axes and computed symmetry score along all those 8 different axes. So once we have these features, symmetry features from both the positive and negative classes, you train another classifier based solely on the symmetry feature to actually distinguish between the positive and negative class, right? So in this way, you'll end up with 2 probability scores, posterior probabilities, one from the symmetry classifier and the other from the deep neural network or the CNN, right? Then you fuse these 2 probability scores together and train another classifier to distinguish between the positive and negative class. So the idea being that if the CNN classifier thinks. Yep, go ahead. Yeah.
So symmetry classifier posterior probabilities and CNN posterior probabilities act like feature to this new classifier.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
So the idea being, if for example a particular image didn't have like a higher probability score in CNN, the probability score that you get from the symmetry classifier, if there is any information about symmetry that distinguishes this particular class from the other class, that can actually influence your decision making, right? This is one way of introducing symmetry information into your CNN related decision making. Is that clear?
Shambhav, is that clear?
Yes, very clear. Yes.
Cool. Yeah. So that is what we did. I mean, I think this is also used in the literature in a different name called late fusion. Mm-hmm. So you fuse actually the posterior probabilities or the classifier outputs to make another decision, right? So as opposed to like early fusion where you actually fuse the features themselves before doing any classification. So just to sort of give you an idea of what the baseline performances are. So we actually used two data sets, ImageNet and Pascal Walk. And the baseline accuracy for ImageNet on VGG16 is about 93%. That's the top one accuracy. And the Pascal Walk object classification on an RCNN is about 86.4%. And you might ask, okay, I mean, this all makes sense in the sense that you're trying to use the symmetry information to influence CNN sort of decision making. But is there any information about these different classes in the symmetry feature itself? So to answer that, we actually looked at purely the classifier performance of the symmetry classifier. And what we find that the classification accuracy here is about chance, significantly about chance, where it does 58% accurate on ImageNet and about 53.3% on Pascal Walk. So there is some information about these various different classes of images in the symmetry features. So in order to actually go into the details of the results that we obtained, so as I mentioned before, we used VGG16 on ImageNet for 1000-way classification, and also an RCNN trained on Pascal Walk for detecting and recognizing 20 different categories. And this is the result that we find. So in the plot above on the right top side, I'm showing you improvement in classification performance. This is on the validation set of ImageNet dataset. And what I'm showing you here on the y-axis is the difference in classification performance when you include symmetry as a feature, as opposed to just the baseline performance of VGG16. And what we can see here clearly is that some of these categories actually show a significant improvement in accuracy. So some categories actually show greater than 5% improvement in performance once we introduce the symmetry features. Similarly, on the Pascal Walk dataset in an RCNN, we see improvements for certain categories of objects. And you might be wondering, why do we see a greater improvement in performance on ImageNet, but not on Pascal Walk? And one answer for that could be that the symmetry-related information in the actual image dataset itself might not be good in Pascal Walk. And to quantify that, we computed symmetry score for all images within an object category in ImageNet and plotted them from the highest to the lowest. And what we can see here is that symmetry, ImageNet has a pretty good symmetry score. Like most of these image categories have higher symmetry score, and they have a wider range of symmetry score. So, I mean, what this implies is that if you introduce symmetry features into your classification pipeline, there are better chances that they'll be useful on ImageNet data set. Whereas if we do the same thing on Pascal walk, there's not a huge variation in the symmetry score. More or less all objects have the same symmetry score, which means that if you have symmetry as a feature in this decision-making pipeline, they might not be able to distinguish between different categories of objects within Pascal walk. So lesser gains in performance on Pascal walk dataset are due to the images being less symmetric themselves. So in general, what we can say is that this augmentation procedure that we have introduced here can actually lead to significant gains in performance depending on the biases present in the data set.
So Pramod, it was, go ahead. I was just.
No. If you have a question,
It was. It will be answered in the next slide. You will.
Okay.
Sorry.
Cool.
Sorry.
Okay. So you might be wondering why this augmentation procedure actually worked. So what is it about representation in the final stages of CNN classification that will be boosted by introducing symmetry-related features, right? We hypothesized that the more important units in the penultimate fully connected layer of a deep neural network, which is trained on object recognition, they actually have weaker representation of symmetry. So when you actually introduce symmetry-related features, they actually combine with those features in the final penultimate fully connected layer and lead to improvements in classification accuracy. So is the hypothesis clear?
If any questions, please go ahead and ask. Significant material was covered in this.
Cool. So if there are no questions, I'll
please proceed.
And if you're asking why the penultimate fully connected layer, because that is the final stage of processing before the softmax probability layer. So that's why we are looking at that. So again, we have this processing hierarchy in VGG16. And the way we actually define the important units for classification in this penultimate fully connected layer is by doing an ablation analysis. I'll explain what I mean by that now. For example, if you look at a normal network, so you have a particular unit in the penultimate fully connected layer that will have certain weight of connection between the softmax layer and that particular layer that is in. So when you give an input image, this unit Ni that I'm representing here will be activated to a certain degree, and it will influence your decision making based on the features that it has learned already, right? And then what you can do is you can actually remove that particular node, which is essentially zeroing out all the output connections going out from that node, right? So you are removing this particular node from influencing whatever decision making that happens, right? So you do that, and you again compute what the probability score is for the given set of images when you remove this particular unit. And
so
then
it will be significantly lower.
If it is important, that's right. If that particular node is important for object classification, the probability score once you ablate or remove that node will be significantly lower.
So is it something like dropout?
Yes, there's essentially like dropout. Yes, that's right. Yeah, but we do it in a post hoc sense, not during the training. In a post hoc sense, not during the training.
Okay.
Yeah, this is after the network has been trained to do whatever it does. Yeah. And then you compute the difference or the drop in this probability score for that particular category across a bunch of images. And that will be your measure of how important that particular node is for object classification. So
how do you determine importance? How do you determine importance?
So which is essentially like the average drop in probability score.
And also, like, why was dropout not used during the training itself and checked if the scores are changing? Like, why afterwards?
They
I
were
understand
actually,
to determine the importance.
Yeah. they were actually used during training. But even then, you will have certain nodes being more important than others, right? Like not all of them will be same. So this is a way of finding that out. Yeah. The pre-trained, I mean, we here used a pre-trained VGG, which had been trained using dropout. So
yeah. One more question. Ram Reddy, please go ahead, Ram Reddy.
Yeah. Hi, Pramod. Actually, I wanted to know, like, how do you check whether we are actually looking at the, I mean, let's say we take a cat, that our algorithm is looking at the cat when we are deciding our model. Because if we have a good data, I mean, very bad data set where, let's say we have a dog on a particular background, if our model is looking at the background, so when I give you of different backgrounds, so it doesn't work well. So how do you check that particular?
So this, I mean, whatever we have assumed here is that the data set that you're actually testing your model on, or for that matter, even the data set you're using to train the model have been labeled properly. Like you have like absolute confidence in what the labels are. So we already have the ground truth.
Yeah, we actually we have the ground truth, but my question was, let's say our data set is having one particular background and all other classes doesn't have that background, and my model is looking at only concentrating on this particular background. When I give a new image of that object with a different background, so it might actually classify it with another class, right, with high probability.
That's
so,
right. Yeah. So I got your question now. Yeah. Okay. So the question is, what happens if you have like a test image from a different distribution than the training distribution, right? So that is about generalization of these neural networks. And with the particular one that we're testing here, it's been trained on ImageNet so that you can be sure that the background or whatever, I mean, there are no incidental features, or there are very little incidental features that the sort of model latches onto to classify different categories. But
Ram Reddy,
it could happen,
Does that answer your question, Ram Reddy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Cool. So now that we have a number that sort of denotes how important each node in this penultimate fully connected layer is for object classification, we can then go ahead and quantify symmetry information in each of these nodes. And how we do that is by doing something similar to what we did with humans. So in humans, in the data set that I showed you, we also had these 49 images, which were created by combinatorially sort of combining 2 different parts or 7 different parts on either side of a stem. So if you go down the column here, the part on the right-hand side varies. And if you go along the row, the part on the left-hand side varies. Right? So we have these 2-part objects. And as you can see, I've highlighted the diagonal here, which are the symmetric objects. And we used both horizontal and vertical versions of these objects. And what we did with the human data is, since we have anyway measured perceptual dissimilarity using visual search, we have dissimilarities between all pairs of these 49 or 98 objects that we have taken here. And then we looked at what the perceptual dissimilarity is for symmetric object pairs and also asymmetric object pairs. And we find that symmetric object pairs are more distinct, significantly more distinct in human perception than asymmetric pairs of objects. And we turn this into a symmetry modulation index. So you take the difference between search dissimilarity for symmetric pairs and asymmetric pairs, and then normalize that by the average of these dissimilarities for symmetric and asymmetric object pairs. So this tells you how sensitive to symmetry your model is, or each node is. So if you compute this for each node in your model. So we did exactly that and compared the symmetry modulation index across the most important units in this penultimate fully connected layer and humans. So I'm showing you the symmetry modulation index for humans here. And this is for the bottom 100 units. So what I mean by this is that these are the 100 units in the penultimate fully connected layer that are least important for object classification.
So it's only like 11%? 11%, that's all. Is it the y-axis? Is it a yeah? You showed.
So it is a percent. That's right. It's like 11%. That's right. Yeah. So this is for perception, which is but for the bottom 100 nodes in the deep neural network, they are much lower. Yeah. But surprisingly, what we found that if you take the most important units, 100 most important unit for object classification in the penultimate fully connected layer, you find that the symmetry modulation index is much less. What this suggests is that these units, which are apparently really useful for object classification, actually are not sensitive to symmetry at all. They are very less sensitive to symmetry compared to human perception, or even for that matter, the 100 least important units for object recognition. So as we hypothesized, the units that are more important for object classification have weaker representation of symmetry. So this is one major sort of insight that we sort of got by poking around and looking at all the response properties of these units in a deep neural network and trying to see if they're somehow related to how symmetry is being processed. And further, we looked at if there are other differences in how these units actually represent things. And one other nugget we found was that these 100 units, which are most useful for object classification, the top 100 units, actually are more sensitive to higher spatial frequencies compared to lower spatial frequency. So this can also allude to some sort of position-independent sort of part processing, in the sense that these units might be less sensitive to or more sensitive to different positions. Whereas what we find in actual neurons in higher visual region is that they are actually location invariant, position invariant. So to answer the third question, can we improve machine vision models using human perception? The answer is yes. Object recognition performance of a CNN, or VGG16 in this case, can be actually improved by augmenting them with symmetry-related information. So to summarize, all machine vision models, including deep neural networks, show systematic biases from human perception. And fixing one such bias, in our case, symmetry, led to improvements in object recognition performance of a widely used deep neural network. And we also further showed that this improvement was probably due to weaker advantage of symmetry among units which are most useful for object recognition. And we think this could be like a general method to augment these machine vision models with human-derived biases and measurements and improve their model performance going forward. So I would like to thank my advisor, SP Arun, and also members of the Vision Lab for helping me during this project. And the dissimilarities that we've collected from humans for these 2,800 objects and 26,000 object pairs is actually available here. The link should also be in the paper, I think.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks.
Yeah. Spectacular presentation, Dr. Pramod. This paper was really. Thank you for explaining it in such simple terms. Very good. This paper is. I know it is pretty heavy for at least undergrads. You explained it very beautifully. I had one question.
I hope I've done like a decent job of like explaining it.
Very good job.
So if you have questions.
Yeah. I just had one question in the plot where you showed three plots before you answered the third question. I just had what was the it is in slide
this one? Okay.
So in the third plot, does that vertical line signify anything or third plot?
Yep, it does actually. So just as we used symmetry modulation index, we also computed a spatial frequency modulation index.
Okay.
Which is essentially what is the activity of each node to higher spatial frequency content relative to lower spatial frequency content.
So it was found to be, how do I interpret that
so
number?
The way to interpret that is the top 100 boxes, the first bar in brown. Those units are more active or more responsive to higher spatial frequency content compared to low spatial frequency content.
Okay.
Whereas the bottom 100 units, which are the least important units for object recognition, they don't show this high modulation. So they respond more or less equally to low and high spatial frequency content.
And the vertical line at the top is simply just part of the...
It's just the statistical test comparing these two distributions. And this denotes that it is significantly higher. The modulation index is significantly higher for the top 100 units compared to the bottom 100 units.
Very good, Dr. Pramod. I will take some quick questions. Please put them in the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and go ahead. Yeah. So, since they are collecting their thoughts, I had one question about generalization. How are you able to compute the generalization errors that you mentioned in the paper? How did you compute that number?
Can you be more specific? Like, what generalization error is this?
So,
for the model performance, you mean?
Yeah.
You mean this one?
Yes.
Okay, so we actually trained this binary classifier. So this entire thing depends on having binary classifiers, right? You have like a positive class and a negative class. So we did that in case of ImageNet. We had 1,000 binary classifiers.
Okay.
Right, and we trained that classifier on the training set of the ImageNet data set. And here, whatever performance I'm showing you is actually done on the validation set.
Okay.
One more question. Where we are using two different features. Can you go to the slide where CNN posterior probabilities and symmetry?
Yeah.
So the features are what? Sparse matrices?
You mean for BGG16 or Symmetry?
No, to the custom classifier that was constructed for using Symmetry classifier, and
it is one number actually from each of these classifiers. So it's a binary classification.
No,
it's one number, right?
Unit matrix?
Yeah, you can think of it that way. That's right. Yeah. Is that clear?
Shambhavi, is it clear?
Yes.
Yeah. Very good. Please post your questions in the chat. And how did you combine human annotation? How did you combine it into the data set?
You mean for this part, the improvement in performance part?
Yes.
Here we actually didn't use any human data. So it's just that we found out that symmetry is something which is different between humans and CNNs. And then we went ahead and included symmetry information. There is no human data here. So if at all there is, it's the labels that the ImageNet dataset has, which were actually generated by humans. So yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So, hello.
Go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So in your paper, you said that adding these human features definitely improved. Like you observed that symmetry was not there in the model, so adding that definitely improved the model. But
that's right.
As such, do you was there any research done on why the model is unable to learn the symmetry? Is it because that just because we are not giving images of that kind, or is there any inherent reason in the layer structure?
But there could be, I can think of two reasons. One, I mean, as I showed you, there is actually some information about symmetry in the ImageNet dataset itself. So if at all, I mean, the model while learning could have used that. But as I also showed you, it's only 58% accurate using symmetry as information. probably the models sort of latched onto other features which were more dominant. And that's probably one reason why they actually didn't learn symmetry related information from this. So that's why when we explicitly included symmetry information into these model pipeline, I mean, we saw an improvement in performance. And the second reason probably could be that in humans and in like actual neural recordings, we find that the higher layers or the higher regions of visual processing actually show part summation or are very sensitive to part information. And that is something which is missing in these deep neural networks. So they're not compositional in the sense that humans are compositional. So if you sort of include a compositional loss while training the model itself, probably you might see symmetry information being used in those learned features.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Shambhavi.
Yeah, one last question. That you were extracting the symmetry features. Say we have to, we do not consider a curated set with uniform background, and we perform segmentation task first to extract the object out from the image. Okay, so then we'll be processing something like feature maps, which will have a very sparse matrix. So how will can we train a CNN or some classifier like that on sparse matrices as well? Because won't that give a very high accuracy, or can this not be generalized for a real-time situation where the object has to be segmented?
That is an interesting point. Because I mean, the whole way the field is moving forward is in the direction of being able to do whatever task you want to do on real naturalistic settings, right? So if you invariably train your model on these isolated objects, probably they might not transfer better to naturalistic settings, right? So that's why probably the field hasn't been doing that.
Shambhavi, maybe you can give an example of what problem you're trying to solve so that Dr. Pramod can answer better, maybe. Okay, Shambhavi?
It seems my internet is off.
Okay, okay. Now we can hear you. Maybe give an example so that Dr. Pramod knows what exactly you're trying to tackle.
Okay, okay, okay. So say we are using a convolutional neural network to extract this eagle out of and what we get as an output is a feature map. So probably that feature map of say 2000 feature points, 2000 activation points will have some zero indexes, like it will be very sparse, right?
Yeah.
So now we don't have an image, now we don't have just one probability unit. How do we pass that feature map into a classifier? Will we be able to use any, say we are using a very basic MLP, it will give very high accuracy because of the sparsity in the data. How should we go about it?
You mean higher accuracy even after cross-validation? Because that's the whole point of doing cross-validation, right? So, that it should be able to generalize. Yeah.
So we can use the similar classifiers even on the feature map?
Yeah, you can. I mean, that's essentially what we've done here, right? So you have like an activity vector or like a probability score or whatever for the first stage of the symmetry classifier. So I told you we extracted 8 symmetry features across 8 different axes, right?
Yes.
So you have a vector for each image now.
Yes.
And we use that to actually train that classifier. So you can train a classifier, but what you have to do is you have to like regularize it in certain ways and also cross-validate it so that you're not overfitting to your
cross-validation is the key.
Cross-validation is the key. Yeah, right. All of the results that I presented are actually cross-validated. Yeah.
Okay. Good. And is there any future scope, Dr. Pramod, to extend this paper, or are you trying to, what are you trying to work on right now?
So there is actually another piece of work, which is essentially about comparing biological vision and deep neural networks. There are actually two works. So in one, actually, we collect a bunch of human perceptual measurements. Like we have these different perceptual effects that people have observed. For example, you might know about Thatcher illusion.
Sorry?
Thatcher face illusion.
Oh, sorry. I do. Oh, yeah.
So, which is essentially, I can actually pull up. Let me see.
Yeah. Browser, you can check. Good. Very good presentation, Dr. Pramod. You made, this is normal. All images were like vector graphics. You used normal PPT or?
This is PPT. Yeah, that's right.
Very images are sharp. Usually, I use it like in PDF, like a vector graphics image, and then use PDF.
I'm not sure about spelling. Yeah, something like this.
Oh, okay.
So, have you seen this? So,
yeah.
The inverted faces here.
Okay.
Actually, looks like there's nothing wrong with them, but when you actually tilt it upright, you see that they're like vastly different.
Oh, scary. Yeah.
So we have a bunch of these perceptual effects, and we have tried to compare, figure out if these deep neural networks also show these effects that we observe in humans. So that is another way of comparing deep neural networks and humans, and trying to figure out if there is any sort of systematic trend in how deep neural networks differ from human perception. And potentially, I mean, if we find something like that, we can include it back in a similar way and improve the classification accuracy.
Good.
And another work is comparing biological visual processing and deep neural networks, in the sense that in humans and in most animals, you have a fovea at the retinal stage that sort of variably samples the visual information that is processed by the brain, right? You have high photoreceptor density where you actually fixate in the scene, and all the peripheral information is sort of sparsely sampled. So the question is whether, I mean, if you include such foveal processing stages in the beginning layers of a deep neural network, will you actually see an improvement in performance? And there also the answer is yes. So I think the paper is on archive. You can go ahead and take a look at it. So yeah.
Good. Very interesting, Dr. Pramod. Very interesting problems. Very good to know that you're working on such interesting problems.
Thanks.
If there are no other questions, I had one question. What did the reviewers ask anything significant during the review process?
Did the reviewers ask anything significant? I mean, there were some questions. I think the main one that I can think of was, I think it was about the cold, like the late fusion and the early fusion that I spoke about. So one question was, why not actually include these 8 symmetry features and tag them onto this 100-dimensional feature vector that you get from a CNN, and then train a classifier on top of that? And we also tried that, but we didn't actually find any improvement in performance, or the improvement was very small. So the reason there also could be that the features that we extract from CNNs are already so like powerful that it sort of overpowers whatever symmetry features that we sort of add on to that. So doing this sort of late fusion seems to work better for that reason. Yeah.
So you gave the explanation after doing the experiment?
Yeah, we did that. Yeah.
Very good, very interesting. Yeah, because this paper usually is very stringent. Review process, I believe it is stringent. I don't know.
That's right. I mean, it is. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Pramod. It was very informative. We thank all participants for attending, and we thank Dr. Pramod for answering all questions. And on behalf of everybody, I thank you for such a detailed presentation. Hopefully everyone gained a lot from it. And obviously it is a different experience listening to the author than reading the paper again.
That's right. I mean, it's a very good initiative, and I hope to sort of follow you guys for future lectures. So
thank you so much. So it was so detailed. I never thought I will understand a paper with such depth and clarity. Not a single doubt left.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've done my job correctly.